There's no way around it and no sugarcoating it. Use of large language models, often just called AI, is proliferating. It's everywhere and it's only going to happen more. And on social media like YouTube and Instagram, it is particularly pernicious because while we're decent at spotting LLM writing, it's much harder when it's delivered enthusiastically by an influencer. Those Instagram shorts with links to a free PDF resource, they're mostly written by LLMs, and the resource is almost always entirely artificially generated. But it's not just here. I've seen polyglot influencers reading scripts straight from ChatGPT unedited. I've seen news stories, essays in magazines, even people responding to emails who start with, "Sure thing, here's an email response," with a cordial tone. Not to mention the literary award scandals. The problem is that LLMs make it absurdly easy to write much more text, and they do have legitimate uses. They can be a tremendous time and money saver, especially when it comes to tedious or formulaic work. But there's understandably strong pushback against LLM use for a variety of reasons, ranging from the eminently practical to absurd moral panic. As an aside, something that is often overlooked is that they're also a gradient technology. I use an iPad with a great keyboard case to write on the subway. I love mine. Not sponsored, but I'll link in the description. It's pretty great if you're interested. Anyway, when I typed for a v, I got an autocomplete suggestion with the entire phrase for a variety of reasons. That's a form of language modeling that is directly related to LLMs, but about which nobody cares. The deeper fears are that people are no longer really thinking for themselves and will eventually be unable to do so. There's a fear that we can be manipulated by thinking machines. Don't worry, we'll get into just how intelligent artificial intelligence actually is. Or even worse, that our thinking can be manipulated by, well, unthinking agents. There's also a moral panic that takes a variety of forms, most often over water use, from people who charge their iPhone, iPad, laptop computer, television, modem, refrigerator, dishwasher, washing machine, regular lights, Christmas light display, and Bitcoin farming servers from the local hydroelectric grid while taking long showers and watering their well-manicured lawns. There's a fear of access to key systems being taken over by a machine that kills us all, which is a deep part of American culture in particular, spanning everything from iRobot to The Matrix to Skynet from Terminator to War Games with Matthew Broderick. Shall we play a game? There's also the fears of the investment bubble from those of us who remember the housing bubble that burst in 2008 or have read about the tulip craze in the Netherlands in the 1600s. Seriously, if you're not familiar with it, go read about it. It is fantastic. It is ridiculous. It's also simply moralized in an increasingly polarized political climate. Musk has an LLM? All LLMs are obviously bad. I still don't forgive him for ruining one of the best sci-fi word coinages in the history of sci-fi. There are ways to tell whether something was written by an LLM, though none of the discussion that I've seen so far actually mentions what I think is the clearest tell. And of course, nothing is foolproof. In fact, fools are precisely the failure case for what I think is the most robust method. Let me explain. If you're new to the channel, I'm Dr. Taylor Jones. I've got a PhD in linguistics from the University of Pennsylvania, and here on the channel, I discuss everything related to language, linguistics, language learning, and culture. If you're into those topics, be sure to subscribe and ring the bell for notifications. Today, we're talking about how to catch an imposter.
Don't fear these things! They're not real!
No, sorry, we're talking about how to spot LLM writing beyond the obvious. I'm Dr. Taylor Jones, and this is Language Jones. LLM writing has distinctive patterns, at least out of the box, which are so robust that there's an entire genre of TikTok making fun of how they talk.
You're not irrational. You're responding to a perceived sustainability crisis at a universal scale. That's macro level thinking.
Because they're actually amazing at what they do, the problem is that none of the tells on their own are valid, but we'll get to that in a minute. Think about ChatGPT voice. You probably have an idea of what it is. It's chipper and conversational, responding with "sure thing,"
Sure thing.
and explaining why whatever you asked is a really great question.
That's a really great question.
There are rhetorical devices that are used to the point of absurdity, most notably a comparison. It's not X, it's Y. I just saw this referred to as the DiGiorno construct, and I love that.
It's not delivery, it's DiGiorno.
Not to be confused with the Maybelline hedge. There's punchy ad copy writing, like breaking sentences into sentence fragments. Honestly, the catch, and so on. There's explicit validation of your or its own arguments, and that matters. Each of the big LLMs has their own overused pet words like delve, honestly, actually, and that matters, gap, and yes, even blueprint. Some of you can already see the problem though. Oh, and Gemini loves buckets and gaps for some reason. No idea why buckets. Claude loves toolkit and move. Any one of these is not evidence of AI, but all of them together are strongly suggestive of LLM use. And it's gotten to the point that people have LLMs create anti-LLM style guides. I've got one for Claude. People have rightly become skeptical of LLM use because depending on the writing task, it can feel like dishonesty. I think Hank Green has a sensible take in that he'll give it a pass if it's clear the person used an LLM to generate some text but clearly had the idea themselves. And we can all agree that, for instance, a novel or an academic paper should be entirely written by a thinking human.
All right, so I scripted, filmed, and recorded this a few days before Hank Green just fell on his sword very publicly about AI misuse and maybe AI addiction. So I should probably be really clear about exactly what he said that I thought resonated, because it wasn't all of that. I remember one video where he was talking about other people using AI, and he said that he tends to give creators a pass if he sees some of the hallmarks of AI, like some of the rhetorical flourishes. If it's clear to him that he didn't understand the information or know the information, and that the other person did, but maybe fleshed out an outline or, I don't know, reworked a paragraph using AI to make it a little bit better suited for the target audience that they have. That makes sense to me as kind of reasonable. To give a concrete example, I've read this book multiple times, I've taught it multiple times, and if I wanted to create a YouTube video about it, which I might do, I can sit down and I can write an outline by hand where I know that it's got everything that's in the book that I want to talk about, or I can brain dump to Claude or some other AI, and I can have it write an outline, which I can then go back, review, compare against my notes, compare against my teaching notes, compare against the actual book, and make sure that it makes sense and is correct. That takes me less time than doing the original writing by hand, and that's just because I write slower than Claude does. But for something where I don't know the information, that's kind of ridiculous, right? Then you Google. Then you're basically just getting me doing a dramatic reading of my own Google results, which I don't know if they're accurate. So that's something that I think is a bad use of it. But maybe a little assistance in outlining something that you definitely already know, that I can see being an acceptable use case for AI. But when you get to my brother and my wife had an intervention because I'm getting too much of a dopamine hit from AI, that's a problem. So yeah, bad timing on my part quoting Hank Green, but what are you going to do?
But here's the problem with being constantly on the lookout for LLM-assisted writing. LLMs follow a lot of writing best practices. My academic writing definitely benefited from a book called They Say, I Say, which explicitly teaches to situate the reader by discussing others' claims and then introduce your own and expand upon them. One way of doing this includes comparison. For instance, it's not AI drivel, it's actually classical rhetoric. I wrote that myself. It's a normal rhetorical flourish. And my academic writing, and that of my advisors and the academics I read a lot of, includes lots of parentheticals, thoughts set off with em-dashes, and groupings of three. That's classical rhetoric. So people are not good at detecting AI because AI now passes a Turing test. That's kind of a tautology in terms of the definition of a Turing test, but I hope you'll indulge me. LLMs write well enough to seem human, which is why people get convinced they're the Messiah, or they should eat 3 cigarettes a day, or whatever. There's a better way to tell. And I haven't seen anybody discuss it, and I think, not for nothing, that is the real indicator of the literacy crisis. Let me explain. There's just a tiny bit of background needed that most people don't know or can't remember, so bear with me for just a second. LLMs, despite being marketed as artificial intelligence, are not actually thinking. They're autocomplete on steroids. They produce an artifact that is the product of statistical transformations of numbers that correspond to words or morphemes or letter sequences that are based on n-grams. N-grams are just a generalization of bigrams, which itself are 2 words or characters that appear side by side in a text. They just have a lot of computational power behind them. And complicated recursive neural networks doing feed-forward feedback tuning with generalized adversarial models, and who knows what else, since my knowledge of this comes from when I rolled my own a decade ago. And I know the math and science have really progressed since then. Point is, though, that they're n-gram TF-IDF, that's term frequency inverse document frequency, so don't come at me in the comments for saying IDF, you lunatics. And basically, next word predictors, like I used when I hit tab to select half a sentence in writing the script, just orders of magnitudes larger and faster. This means they do not think. There is no thinking. There is no reasoning. They are dumb, but fast. They're just faster at being dumb. Being dumb faster than everybody else gives a lot of people the appearance of intelligence. It's really hard to wrap your head around this because they sure look and sound like they're answering your questions. They're not. What they do is, given a prompt, which is transformed into a string of digits for them, they provide an optimized string of digits in return. The optimization really means that what they provide, after being transformed from digits back to letters and spaces, is an artifact that appears similar to how an answer might appear. Does that make sense? Like, if you say, "Can you pass the salt?" a plausible answer might be yes, no, maybe. Do I sound like a magic 8-ball? Same idea. A less plausible answer is salt, or NaCl, is a mineral that, and a total failure is something like Dostoevsky was born in 1821, or C'était le pire. That yes is not a yes. It's just one of the set of words that is the highest ranked as appearing like a valid answer. And this is how you spot them. Because they're not thinking, they're just putting words together. You get words that go together, but that lack semantic coherence. They're not manipulating concepts, they're just manipulating strings of letters. And yes, I wrote that last sentence myself too. So incoherent but plausible word choices or mixed metaphors, along with all those other clues, are the real giveaway. Let me give some examples. I recently saw a purported geopolitical analysis of the deployment of naval power during the war with Iran. Get your Language Jones bingo cards ready. The article had all the hallmarks of LLM writing people are familiar with, including, my peeve, the ever-expanding use of quietly and amid. But it started by describing a military offense as, quote, nestled amid a year of war. Nestled? Gemini, in fleshing out an outline I wrote, returned a paragraph that included a description of two conceptual categories as two overarching pillars that undergird the entire whatever the fuck we were talking about. Overarching pillars are already architecturally incoherent, but simultaneously overarching and undergirding is mind-bendingly perverse. Jet fuel might not be able to melt steel beams. Bingo! Oh, God. But Gemini sure seems to be able to. For another Gemini howler, I got a paragraph that said, words aren't just empty containers, a blank slate to be filled. I can't remember if it said containers or buckets, actually, because it really loves buckets. Anyway, you can fill a container. You can fill a slate. Those are common enough co-occurrences. What is entirely opaque to an LLM is that those are two radically different conceptual meanings of filling something. Turning our attention to Claude, it's not better. Every time I try to use it to accelerate my writing, I get back lines like, we're going to look at two related toolkits and see what they buy you when you point them at a problem like, let's think about this for a minute. We're going to do what now? We're going to look at a toolkit, okay, and see what it buys you. We're bartering tools now? When you point it at, when you what? Have you ever bought anything by pointing a toolkit at it? I know I haven't. I tried it at the local cafe and they told me, sir, put the wrench down or we're calling the cops. That's Spanner and Constabulary for my UK viewers. The number one giveaway of LLM writing is not the punchy ad copy sentences, the overuse of honestly and delve, the use of it's not X, it's Y comparisons, and rhetorical groupings of three. It's the absolute conceptual incoherence behind common word choices. But this gives rise to a problem, and quite a serious one at that, given the accelerating literacy crisis. Namely, some people are also incoherent thinkers who mix metaphors. Even if LLMs were all trained on the Tevyas and Dogberries of their source material, people routinely mix metaphors. My wife and I do it for fun. Bingo! But what we do is the opposite of an LLM. Things like mixing you set them up, I knock them down, and you opened the door, I just walked through it, to get you set them up, I just walked through them. Like a sculpture garden. Or you opened the door, I just knocked it down. Like a SWAT team. Anyway, the very real question is, do we need to determine whether it's an LLM or an idiot before discounting incoherent writing? I recently read an article in The Atlantic bemoaning, what else, declining literacy, where I ended up spending a significant portion of it trying to determine why it was so bad. It turns out it was written by an undergrad, and it read, well, like an undergrad writing project barely worthy of a B. It, of course, overlooked one possible reason for declining rates of magazine reading. Magazines now publishing creative writing exercises from undergrads. Point is, whether it was an LLM or not was a red herring. It was simply bad writing. And that points to a bigger issue. LLMs can actually be quite useful. They're particularly useful for boilerplate, for first drafts of easily verifiable information, especially when you have to write similar documents repeatedly. For instance, explaining the concept of a phoneme. before, of course, then editing it. They really shine when used for language study. They're large language models, after all. I've got a whole segment of my upcoming course on self-directed language study that is on how to use LLMs to their maximum potential. For more on that, scan the QR code or go to www.languagejones.com/accelerator. And none of it is LLM generated because they would never, in a million years, think of it. They're also useful for things like, read this draft. Are there any glaring omissions? That is, finding things you left out, locating places that you can cut material. That's a lot of how I use them, and so on. Everything, though, must be taken with a huge grain of salt and edited multiple times, even things that were correct in previous drafts. And full disclosure, I've used LLMs in scripting for YouTube. In fact, I did an entire experiment to see whether my channel did better with content I wrote entirely on my own or workshopped with LLMs. The results are in another video, but spoilers, they might be depressing. I moved away from it after the experiment, even though LLM videos kind of do better, because the mental burden of correcting incoherent metaphors was too much. I'd rather learn steno, which I'm doing, than edit another paragraph from Gemini or Claude about what happens when you point overarching buckets or whatever. However, I may still use Claude from time to trim fat. And ever since having Gemini write my YouTube descriptions, my videos do better. I didn't know elements of the algorithm that Google's products did know. So next time you're suspicious of LLM writing, while it can help to play LLM bingo, look for incoherent semantics. As an aside, let's take "so next time you" at the end of a video. A call to action is a hallmark of YouTube writing. I wrote this one myself, but the rhetorical move is just good writing for this format. And I would have said rhetorical move anyway, but now I'm aware that it sounds like Claude. If you like what I'm doing with the channel, you can support it on YouTube with super thanks or on Patreon at patreon.com/languagejones. Please leave me a comment. They are great for the algorithm. And subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, happy hunting.